Welcome to the Virtual Women's Forum, a groundbreaking initiative empowering women across generations. This collaboration between WSD Women and the East African community, women's intergenerational dialogue paves the way for transformative connections. Our mission is to unite senior women leaders with young visionaries for mentorship and impactful dialogue. Centered on the theme, the role of digital technologies and social media in enhancing women's leadership and empowerment, we aim to inspire change. Join us as we explore barriers and best practices in business, technology, media, politics, and academia. Together, we foster a future where women lead fearlessly, empowered by digital tools and networks. Through shared experiences and wisdom, we cultivate a space for growth and innovation. Join us in this transformative journey and let's shape the future of women's leadership together.
As we mark 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, I am reminded of how pivotal that moment was in shaping a global agenda for gender equality. Yet, while Beijing gave us a powerful blueprint, it also compels us to reflect honestly. Where have we advanced, and where are we still falling short for women today? I am deeply honored to be in conversation with Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, a trailblazer whose leadership and commitment to women's empowerment continues to inspire. In this dialogue, we will reflect on how the Beijing Plus 30 moment resonates for us as African women leaders, particularly within the East African community, and how we can harness this milestone to drive renewed commitments to systematic reform and inclusive development. We will explore questions that matter deeply. Has the momentum of Beijing translated into structural change in governance and development? How do we ensure younger generations not only inherit this legacy, but also reimagine it for the next 30 years? And what does true gender equality look like in practice, especially in governance and development? Finally, I look to reflecting on the role of forums like World Speech Day Women and the East African Community Women's Caucus in strengthening solidarity among African women leaders, ensuring that the spirit of Beijing continues to live, grow, and adapt to the challenges of our times. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi. As we mark 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, what progress stands out for you, and where have we fallen short?
The Beijing Declaration and the Beijing Platform for Action was, I think, one of the most progressive and advanced documents as it related to the road to women's development. Through that declaration, we were able to include a number of areas that related to women's control over their reproductive health and their reproductive rights, which was far-reaching. Secondly, there was also very clearly proposals that looked at the whole issue of education of women. It looked at the issue of women in the economy and all. So in essence, I mean, it looks at something like 11 wide areas. Where have we gone? As a country, we have advanced. But I think one of the countries that have really advanced on the rolling back of poverty has been China. Because China has lifted a very large segment of the population out of poverty, and women in particular. And I think nowhere else in the world can claim to have done it in that particular way. When we look at the whole issue of rights of women and human rights, I think South Africa is quite far advanced. But the issue is that there tends to be a disjunction or a disconnect between policies that have been developed and its actual implementation. And I think for us, that's a major challenge when we look at the chasm between policies and implementation. Commitments are made, but we don't always have a sense of having measured the impact. Another outstanding area of gain for women has been women political representation. And I think on the African continent, we see that in particular, because you can look at Rwanda, you look at South Africa, you can look at quite a few other countries. Namibia's just had its first woman president. So there's a sense that on the issue of women in politics, there has been progress. In all sectors of society, and when we come to the economy, it's not as far as advanced as we'd wish it to be.
And you mean from a continental perspective?
From a continental perspective, but from a global perspective as well. Because I think an interesting data point is the fact that on women serving on boards of publicly listed companies, there's more representation in Africa than in North America, for example, or even Europe. So it shows the reality that in certain instances, the developing world may be ahead on some markers, whilst the developed world is lagging.
And I think the East African communities, countries in particular, have made significant strides in this regard, with regard to the representation of women.
Absolutely, and hence I had indicated that Rwanda is a case in point.
Yes. That's correct. Yes. So how can African women leaders, particularly in the East African community, use the Beijing 30 movement to drive renewed commitments to gender equality and systematic reform? This initiative has emanated from a call from young or aspiring women leaders to women in leadership to guide them. So I think maybe if you could keep that in mind.
Yes. What's quite critical is that the activists who went to Beijing, I think it's important for their generation to get involved in an intergenerational movement that brings together and brings the younger women in. Because as was pointed out in a recent discussion that I was involved in, looking at Beijing Plus 30, is the fact that even when it comes to certain definitions, there has been a march on, how we may define women and development, how we'll define feminism and all that kind of thing. And I use that as a small example. But the biggest issue is, the need to hand over the baton, but at the same time to be willing to share experiences that we have been through. As I always say, we were radical when we were younger as well. It could be argued that we may even have been more radical than the current generation, because we were the generation that were involved in transformation, the generation that moved in South Africa from apartheid to a new democracy. On the African continent, many of the women who were involved were the women who came out of the era that was post-colonization, and hence the whole issue of a colonization movement and all. And it's how do you bring this together? How do you bring the energy together to build? Because at the end of the day, there's a need to guard against, reinventing the wheel, or, hitting the same potholes that others have hit. So let's invest our energy to build on what has been in order to take things forward. But I think the big issue is about building a movement and renewing and rebuilding the women's movement and a movement across the continent.
And I think when you talk about reinventing the wheel, I guess also as time has gone by, progress has been made. So where previously the struggle would have been over basic human rights, yes, that's still very prevalent in many spaces. But because of the growth and progress that has taken place, it probably has opened up a space for other forms of development and growth, like in leadership. I mean, maybe if addressing, women's, reproductive rights and health issues and sexual rights and education and so on was first and foremost, I think how they grow as leaders probably wasn't there wasn't as much space and room for that growth as there is now. It's a different time, as you said. Your struggles were different back then.
Indeed, but I think we should also bear in mind that patriarchy is universal, and patriarchy is going to fight back. So we're at a moment in time with 1995 and the Fourth World Women's Conference. And as Gertrude Mongela said at the end of that conference, but Gertrude Mongela was the Secretary General of the United Nations Fourth World Conference. She's also Tanzanian. And she at the end of the conference said, the revolution has begun. And the irony is, you haven't seen this revolution growing to the extent to which we would wish it. Gertrude Mongela at the end of the UN Fourth World Women's Conference, she ended on the line that the revolution had begun. But we don't really have a sense of this revolution having grown. And I think part of it may be because women at the time thought we have been able to put together such a far-reaching program of action. We had such a progressive declaration that was, I believe, voted on and supported by something like 155 countries. We'll need to check that number, but that's my recollection, that we actually thought, okay, we can look at other sites of struggle. What we've been shown is you can never become complacent, because there is going to be clawback. So we've spoken earlier about reproductive health and reproductive rights. Look at the United States of America. Across the different states in the US, they are clawing back on women's reproductive health and reproductive rights. So it means the assumption was wrong. The assumption that the struggle was won, it wasn't won, because patriarchy was clawing back. And I think similarly, when we look at spaces, if you look globally, there are fewer and fewer women occupying the world stage. And you ask yourself, why? Is there a closing off of spaces? Is there a situation where men haven't fully been convinced or carried on board or consistently socialized in a manner to understand the importance of diversity in all spheres of society? And I think think that's the big question at the moment. I mean, there is also the fact that the gender movement goes beyond the women's movement, and it also looks at sexual orientation and all that kind of thing. And we've got to look at how we take that forward in a manner that actually almost enshrines it in our DNA. And I think we're not there yet.
In your previous interview that I was listening to, I wonder, is it also women as well to step up a bit more? Could that also contribute?
Of course. I mean, everyone should step up and step out, but we must ensure that for us to really overcome some of the stereotypes, discrimination, the fact that women get stigmatized and all, it means you need to involve men as well. So this is not just a struggle for women alone. It's a struggle for women and men. And I think, the whole space of equality and equity is a very contested space. It's even contested amongst women.
Do you think the momentum from Beijing has translated into lasting structural change in government and development, especially for African women? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think that is not even across the African continent. So in certain countries, you've very clearly seen greater representation of women in politics. You've looked at clear attempts of looking at women and education, and in particular education for the girl child. We look at the issue of STEM subjects and greater involvement of women. It's increasing, but also because we still have conflicts on the continent. You have women and children disproportionately impacted upon by those conflicts, So has there been progress? Yes and no. So it's uneven progress. And we see different pockets. And it goes to the point that I'd like to make that firstly, we should not see progress on women's equality as even. We should not see women as a homogeneous group. We should not make assumptions that Beijing has completely ensured the structural and systemic changes required. The road from Beijing is still an open road, and we must continue walking on it.
Which brings me to the next question. How can younger generations connect with the legacy of Beijing while reimagining a more inclusive and intersectional movement for the next 30 years?
So I want to start with the last point you raised. We do need an intersectional women's movement. And we need to build that movement even more strongly. And as we are aware, there is the Pan-African Women's Organization, but they had gone through particular hiccups. Probably there's a need now to revitalize PAU, to revitalize sectoral movements that women engage in, but to look towards a larger global women's movement on the African continent that looks towards equality and solidarity. Solidarity for the women in Sudan, solidarity for women in conflict situations, solidarity for women who are facing genocide. And this also means our solidarity should include the women in Gaza.
You're giving me ideas for the way forward for this initiative.
Thank you.
Yes. So, what does meaningful gender equality look like in governance and development? especially in light of the commitments made at Beijing 30 years ago?
Women who are part of the inclusive African economy, not as a beneficiary, but as a player, as an actor. Women who are able to give birth safely and not die during childbirth. Women who have access to food and food security and are actors in the agricultural and sustainable agricultural sector. Women in education across all levels, and safety for children. And in our country, every woman should be able to walk freely and safely, irrespective of the time of day or night. She should be safe on the streets and safe in her home. She should be safe in the workplace, as well as being safe in education institutions. She should be able to go to a post office and not fear that her life ends in that post office. So for women, and success for gender equality is that no sector of society or the economy is closed off for her. No glass ceilings. Because as the women said in Beijing, and there's a Chinese saying that women hold up the sky. So let us reach out and use our power and our numbers to claim this world to be a world that is friendly to all women and men.
And I think listening to some of the points you've raised, there are some of us that can take some of that for granted.
Exactly.
Safety, I think, affects everybody, but there are some aspects of what you've spoken about. It has not impacted on us because we were blessed to grow up maybe in an environment with circumstances and the right support for us to be able to take that for granted. And I guess then the responsibility should also fall on those of us who had those privileges.
Privileges,
To hold in the
yes.
hands of our sisters to take them forward. Which brings me to my last question. What do you see the role of forums like World Speech Day Women and the Africa Community Women's Caucus in strengthening solidarity and amplifying the Beijing Plus 30 agenda amongst African women leaders? I think we did allude a little bit to you giving us some direct.
So there's a couple of things on that. You are a forum there that's in existence already. You know the challenges around building organization. This is the time when you need to look at how you can expand. How can you extend your reach? How do you ensure that you use your forum to bring together not only the Sustainable Development Goals, but the Beijing platform of action, and build on the 30 years and see what more can be done. And through this, you'll bring Agenda 2063 as well of the African Union and look at the alignment in order to ensure that there is impactful change. And impactful change is both through the quality of your interventions as well as the numbers that you can reach. And you need to do both without compromising one.
So, as you know, this is the first phase of a flagship initiative that we plan to see to completion till at the end of the year, with the view of this becoming a part of a larger African initiative. But of course, it's not possible without us being privileged enough to have speakers like you on this forum. You've given me guidance just in our conversation today. You've given us, Ambassador Fatuma and I, a big reason to smile when you agreed to be a part of this. And we look to leaders like you, Direction. I thank you so much for taking the time, for giving us the guidance, giving us your insight, and for all that you do for women in general, not just in Women's Month. And this interview isn't being done just because of Women's Month. Our work is ongoing every day. We are there to develop women through advocacy and capacity building, and we are able to do what we do because we are inspired by leaders like you. So Geraldine, thank you once again for your time, and I look forward to you being a part of what we plan to do going forward.
Thank you, Vino, and I'm quite humbled by you calling on me, and let's see how we do this together. It's the only way we'll make a difference.
Our conversation with Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi has reminded us of both the enduring power and the unfinished work of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. 30 years on, it is clear that progress has been made. Women have greater visibility in leadership, policy commitments have been strengthened, and spaces for women's voices continue to expand. Yet, we also acknowledge the persistent gaps, inequality in governance and development, barriers to economic participation, and the need for deeper structural transformation. Dr. Fraser-Moleketi has highlighted that for African women, and particularly those in the East African community, Beijing Plus 30 is not just a commemoration, but an opportunity, a call to renew commitments, confront systematic barriers, and build movements that are both inclusive and intersectional. A general theme that has emerged is the importance of younger generations to the Beijing legacy, ensuring that they are not only beneficiaries of past struggles, but also co-creators of a more equitable future. Finally, our dialogue underscored the vital role of platforms such as WSD Women and the East African Community Women's Caucus, which provide the space to strengthen solidarity, amplify voices, and collectively advance the agenda for meaningful gender equality. As we look ahead, the Beijing vision remains a compass, urging us to transform commitments into lasting change for women today and for generations to come.